The year is 1917, and the state of Florida has just elected a third-party candidate to become its governor. Former preacher Sidney J steps into office, not as a unifier, but as a man on a mission to save Florida from what he claimed were sinister Catholic plots and immigrant threats. He presented himself as the champion of the common man, but once he got into power, it became clear Sidney J wasn't saving anyone but himself. Beneath the fiery sermons and good old boy charm was a man whose term as governor was defined by corruption, cronyism, and outright scandal. Sidney was born in 1863 in Pleasant Hill, Alabama. As a boy, was described as intelligent but restless, showing early signs of strong opinions and a knack for persuasion. He was described as independent and ambitious, but always looking for attention, traits that carried into his later life. There was one particular incident from youth that stands out. Parents employed sharecroppers to work the land of their Alabama farm. During an altercation with one of his African-American farm laborers, the young Sidney shot and killed the man. Fortunately for the young an all-white jury quickly acquitted him after a plea of self-defense. This incident would be the first of many times in his life that Sidney would successfully skirt the rule of law. Was well educated for the time. He attended Howard College, now Samford University, in Alabama, and later Cumberland School of Law in Tennessee, where he earned a law degree. Changed careers multiple times, practicing law for a short time. He would later become an insurance salesman before entering the ministry. His time as a Baptist preacher, particularly in small southern towns, reveals a charismatic yet divisive personality. He was known for his fiery oratory skills and his ability to hold a crowd's attention. As a Baptist pastor, knew how to command a room. His sermons were passionate, dramatic, and full of fire and brimstone imagery about good versus evil. In 1911, moved to Defuniak Springs, Florida, and quickly became a popular figure for his plain-spoken style. By 1916, decided to enter politics, hoping to clean up what he saw as corruption in Florida. He ran for governor as a Democrat and won the primary, or so he thought. After a controversial recount, was declared the loser. This turn of events made irate. He decided that instead of conceding, he switched political parties. There had been a long push in the US for a law to be passed banning the sale of alcohol. Saw an opportunity. He would take advantage of popular sentiment against alcohol and run under the Prohibition Party's ticket. During his campaign, leaned heavily into anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant, and racist rhetoric. He claimed that Catholic immigrants from Italy, Spain, and Cuba were part of a secret plot by the Vatican to overthrow the United States government. This hate-mongering made him the darling of white supremacists and the Ku Klux Klan. In a stunning upset, Florida's first ever third-party candidate Sidney J. would become Florida's next governor. Florida's voters thought they were getting a reformer. Instead, they voted by a man who played by nobody's rules but his own. was inaugurated governor on January 2, 1917. Always the showman, parade procession made history as the first to consist of automobiles. 50 cars roared toward the Capitol building, signaling the emergence of a new technological era. Himself rode in the Model T Ford that he used to campaign across the state. Took office during World War I when the country was on edge. Instead of easing tensions, he added fuel to the fire. His speeches warned of Catholic priests stockpiling weapons and German spies infiltrating Florida's communities. The rhetoric was extreme, and for many terrifying. But while the public was focused on imagined threats, was busy enriching himself and his friends. His most infamous scheme was selling pardons. The governor knew the power his pen could yield. Florida's prisons were filled with convicts, many of them serving time for violent crimes, and Sidney saw an opportunity to profit. For the right price, prisoners could buy their freedom. Judges and law enforcement officials were outraged, but didn't care. The cash rolled in, and the prison gates swung open. In a twist of irony, the man seen as the standard-bearer of the Prohibition Party was in fact profiting from the sale and distribution of alcohol. Handed out lucrative state contracts to his closest allies, regardless of qualifications. Nepotism reigned supreme during the Katz administration. The governor set his children up in cushy government jobs, in some cases listing them as holding multiple roles, all at the expense of the taxpayer, of course. Katz treated state money like his personal piggy bank. He traveled frequently and disguised personal trips as official state business. Taxpayer dollars paid for his luxury accommodations and extravagant outings, while working-class Floridians sacrificed for the war effort. Anti-Catholic Crusade Katz attacks on Florida's Catholic population are among the darkest aspects of his administration. He spread wild conspiracies that priests were hiding weapons in churches for a Vatican-led uprising. He pushed legislation targeting Catholic schools and churches, making life so difficult for some Catholic families that many left their rural towns for larger cities where they could find more safety. By 1921, Katz's term as governor ended, and so did his grip on power. But the trouble wasn't over for him. It was just beginning. The pardon scandal, combined with other allegations of corruption and bigotry, effectively ended Katz's political career. After leaving office in 1921, he attempted a political comeback, running for the U.S. Senate in 1920 and for governor again in 1924. Both campaigns failed miserably. Then things got worse. In 1927, Katz was indicted on federal charges of peonage, a practice that forced black laborers to work under conditions that closely resembled slavery. Katz was accused of holding workers against their will on private farms, using intimidation to keep them trapped. While the charges were eventually dropped, the damage to his reputation was permanent. Just a few years later, Katz found himself in trouble again, this time for land fraud. He was arrested for selling worthless tracts of land to unsuspecting buyers, many of whom lost their life savings. The man who once claimed to defend the little guy was now swindling them out of their hard-earned money. Though he was arrested, Katz once again managed to use his connections to avoid conviction and jail time. The land fraud scandal effectively ended any remaining credibility he had. The public increasingly saw him as a con artist rather than the moral reformer he once claimed to be. Despite this, Katz continued to insist that he was the victim of political enemies and Yankee conspiracies. Katz never admitted wrongdoing and spent his final years in relative obscurity. Sidney Katz died in 1936 at the age of 72. For all his talk of righteousness and reform, Katz's real legacy is one of greed and betrayal. Sidney J. Katz spent his final years in relative obscurity, living far from the public eye. His days of fiery speeches and political influence were long gone. He died in 1936 at the age of 72. Katz is remembered not for progress or reform, but for the fear, corruption, and division he sowed. His governorship serves as a cautionary tale about how quickly power can corrupt, and how dangerous a leader can become when they prioritize personal gain over the good of the people.